The contrast principle. The contrast principle is a powerful psychological effect that shapes the way we perceive differences between things. Rather than evaluating something on its absolute qualities, the human brain tends to judge it in relation to what came just before or after. This means our perception is constantly being skewed by comparison. What seems big, expensive, impressive, or appealing often seems that way because of what we've just experienced, not because of its inherent value. The contrast principle takes advantage of this relative thinking to influence decisions, perceptions, and behavior without us even realizing it. Imagine you walk into a store and see a jacket priced at $300. It might seem expensive at first. But then the salesperson shows you another jacket that costs $800. Suddenly, that $300 jacket feels like a bargain. Its price hasn't changed, but your perception of its value has shifted dramatically because of the direct comparison. This is the contrast principle at work. The brain uses the second option to set a new reference point, and everything after it is judged against that standard. This principle is used constantly in sales, marketing, and negotiation. Real estate agents might show you a rundown house first so that the next one, only slightly better, seems much more appealing. Car dealers might present a fully loaded, high-end model before showing you the mid-range version, making the latter feel more reasonable. Even in dating apps or social settings, the people we meet earlier in a sequence can influence how attractive or interesting we perceive the next person to be. We don't evaluate in a vacuum, we evaluate through contrast. What's remarkable is how automatic this process is. Our brains are wired to notice differences, not absolutes. This makes evolutionary sense. Spotting contrast, such as food versus poison, friend versus threat, is essential for survival. But in everyday life, this tendency can be easily manipulated. Someone might present a difficult request right after asking for something outrageous, making the real ask feel far more acceptable. Or you might be more likely to splurge on accessories after buying an expensive item, because spending $50 more feels insignificant after just spending hundreds. The contrast principle also works in reverse. If you lift a heavy object first and then a lighter one, the second item feels even lighter than it really is. The principle isn't just psychological, it has a sensory component as well. Our nervous systems are built to register change, and contrast heightens perception. Understanding this trick can protect you from being unconsciously influenced. When you find yourself reacting strongly, thinking something is especially cheap, attractive, or impressive, it helps to pause and ask, compared to what? This forces the mind to evaluate the item or idea on its own merits, not just in contrast to what came before. Being aware of the contrast principle allows you to see through artificial benchmarks and stay grounded in more objective judgment. At the same time, you can use this principle intentionally in communication or persuasion. If you're presenting an idea, proposal, or request, you can frame it by first introducing something more extreme or less favorable. People will naturally lean toward the more reasonable second option, feeling like they're making a balanced choice, even though their perception is being gently steered. In essence, the contrast principle doesn't change the things we see, it changes how we see them. It quietly reshapes our judgments by playing with the sequence and framing of what's presented. Once you understand it, you can step outside of its automatic pull and become a more thoughtful observer, not just of things, but of your own reactions. Time pressure illusion. The experience of time is not fixed, it's fluid, subjective, and often shaped more by perception than by reality. One psychological trick that plays on this fact is the time pressure illusion, the tendency to feel rushed, overwhelmed, or short on time even when, objectively, there's enough of it. This illusion can cause stress, decision fatigue, and poor performance, not because there's truly a lack of time, but because the brain believes there is. Time pressure illusion stems from how our cognitive systems handle competing tasks and demands. When the brain perceives multiple responsibilities, looming deadlines, or a long to-do list, it interprets this as urgency. This triggers a stress response that can lead to panic or hurried thinking, regardless of whether there's an actual shortage of minutes or hours. In this state, we often overestimate how long things will take and underestimate our capacity to manage them calmly. This illusion is especially common in modern life, where people juggle constant notifications, multitasking, and a culture that glorifies busyness. Being busy has become a badge of importance, but it often masks inefficiency and anxiety. The irony is that time pressure can reduce the very cognitive clarity we need to handle our tasks well. When you feel rushed, your focus narrows, your creativity drops, and your ability to plan and prioritize weakens, even if there's actually enough time to approach things methodically. One reason this illusion is so convincing is that the brain tends to compress time under stress. Moments feel faster, decisions feel urgent, and we feel internally hurried even if we're not physically moving quickly. This creates a mismatch between perceived and actual time, which leads people to act as though there's a clock ticking louder than it really is. Understanding this trick is the first step to countering it. Simply recognizing that your sense of time scarcity might be an illusion helps restore control. Techniques like time blocking, writing down your actual schedule, or even pausing to breathe deeply and reset your nervous system can diffuse the urgency. Often, people find that when they step back and map out their time clearly, they have more than they thought. In many cases, the illusion fades once a task is broken into smaller parts or started without hesitation. Much of the pressure comes not from the task itself, but from the anticipation of it, the vague feeling that there's too much and not enough time. Once you begin, the fog lifts, and time seems to expand again. That's because taking action helps the brain shift from abstract fear to concrete focus. The time pressure illusion is powerful because it feels so real. But when you recognize it as a trick of the mind, a product of stress, not fact, you regain the ability to respond with clarity instead of panic. The truth is, we often have more time than we think. It's how we perceive and use that time that makes the difference. By stepping outside the illusion, we trade frantic motion for intentional movement, and reclaim our ability to manage time wisely. Prolonged eye contact builds attraction. Eye contact is one of the most powerful forms of nonverbal communication. It conveys interest, confidence, vulnerability, and connection, all without a single word being spoken. Among its many psychological effects, one of the most intriguing is its ability to build and intensify attraction. Prolonged eye contact, when mutual and appropriately timed, can create a profound sense of intimacy between people, even in a short amount of time. This effect has been studied in both psychology labs and real-world interactions. One of the most famous experiments was conducted by psychologist Arthur Aaron, who found that strangers who held eye contact for several uninterrupted minutes reported significantly increased feelings of closeness, even love, compared to those who did not. The reason for this lies in how sustained eye contact amplifies emotional and physiological arousal. When you look into someone's eyes and they look back without breaking gaze, it signals mutual attention and receptiveness. This mutual focus acts almost like a spotlight, tuning out distractions and deepening the connection between two people. From a biological standpoint, prolonged eye contact can stimulate the release of oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone. Oxytocin plays a key role in trust, bonding, and affection. It's released during moments of physical closeness, such as hugging or touching, but extended eye contact can trigger a similar response, without the need for physical contact. This creates a sensation of emotional warmth and trust, which are foundational elements of attraction. There's also a subtle psychological vulnerability involved in maintaining eye contact. When you look deeply into someone's eyes, you're offering a level of openness and presence that's rare in everyday life. You're not just looking at the person, you're allowing them to see you. This kind of mutual exposure can be disarming, even exhilarating, because it removes the usual social defenses people carry. That vulnerability, paradoxically, builds strength in a budding connection. It tells the other person, I see you, and I'm not looking away. Prolonged eye contact also heightens self-awareness, both in the person giving it and receiving it. You become more attuned to your own emotions while simultaneously watching how the other person reacts to you. This creates a powerful feedback loop where both people feel seen, understood, and emotionally engaged. In romantic or flirtatious settings, this can intensify chemistry and create a sense of electricity that's hard to fake or ignore. Of course, context matters. If eye contact feels forced, aggressive, or overly intense, it can have the opposite effect, creating discomfort or even anxiety. The key is mutuality. Prolonged eye contact builds attraction best when both parties are engaged willingly, when the gaze is soft and natural rather than confrontational, and when it's balanced with other cues like smiling, body language, and verbal openness. It's not about staring, but about holding space in silence, and allowing a moment of honest presence. In everyday life, most eye contact is fleeting, just long enough to acknowledge someone before moving on. But when you extend it with intention, it creates a pause in time, a quiet moment of connection that says something deeper than words ever could. That's why prolonged eye contact isn't just a trick, it's a kind of emotional bridge. It draws people closer, intensifies feelings, and invites attraction not through manipulation, but through simple, shared presence. Give someone a choice between two options. One of the most subtle yet powerful psychological tricks in persuasion and communication is giving someone a choice between two options. On the surface, it appears respectful and democratic, it makes the other person feel like they are in control. But underneath, it's a strategic way of guiding their decision-making while still steering them toward an outcome you prefer. When you present someone with two options, both of which you are comfortable with, you create what psychologists call a false dichotomy or a limited choice framework. Instead of leaving the person to contemplate an open-ended decision, which can be overwhelming or lead them to reject your proposal entirely, you reduce their mental load and subtly influence the direction of the outcome. For example, instead of asking, "Do you want to buy this?" which invites a yes or no answer, you ask, "Would you prefer to pay in full today or split it over 2 months?" Suddenly, the question is no longer if they will buy, but how. This technique leverages cognitive ease. The human brain prefers simplicity and structure. When presented with just two options, people are more likely to feel like they've considered their choices and made a conscious, deliberate decision. Ironically, that sense of agency can make them more satisfied with the choice, even if it was subtly engineered. This approach is also effective in reducing resistance. When people feel pressured or manipulated, their natural instinct is to push back. But by giving them two seemingly equal choices, you bypass that defensive reaction. It's not about forcing compliance, it's about allowing them to participate in the decision process while you gently shape the available paths. Used ethically, this tactic can aid in negotiations, parenting, leadership, sales, and even daily conversations. For instance, a parent might say, "Do you want to do your homework before or after dinner?" Both choices lead to the desired outcome, doing homework, but the child feels involved and empowered in making the decision. In essence, offering a choice between two options is a psychological trick that blends guidance with the illusion of freedom. It works because it respects the person's autonomy while subtly narrowing their focus to outcomes you find acceptable. When done with genuine intentions, it becomes less of a manipulation tool and more of a communication art. Smile to feel better. It's easy to think of a smile as a simple reaction to happiness, something that happens only after we feel good. But psychological research suggests the relationship runs in both directions. Not only do we smile when we're happy, but smiling itself can actually help us feel better. This counterintuitive trick, smiling to create a positive emotion, rather than waiting for it, taps into the subtle feedback loop between body and brain. This concept is based on what's known as the facial feedback hypothesis, which proposes that our facial expressions influence our emotional experience. When you smile, even if it's intentional or forced, the muscles in your face send signals to your brain that are similar to those it receives when you're genuinely happy. In response, the brain releases neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin, chemicals associated with feelings of pleasure, calm, and well-being. In other words, the act of smiling can create a small but measurable shift in your emotional state, even if nothing around you has changed. This effect has been demonstrated in multiple studies. In one well-known experiment, participants were asked to hold a pen in their mouth in different ways that either forced their facial muscles into a smile or a frown, without being told the true purpose of the test. Those whose facial muscles mimicked a smile reported feeling happier and found cartoons funnier than those whose faces mimicked a frown. Though subtle, the change was consistent, showing that the body can influence mood from the outside in. Smiling also affects how others respond to you, which in turn feeds back into your emotional state. When you smile, people are more likely to perceive you as friendly, approachable, and confident. That positive social feedback can make you feel more accepted and supported, which contributes to an improved mood. So even a polite, socially motivated smile can trigger a chain reaction of warmth and connection that improves how you feel inside. This isn't to say that smiling is a cure for deep sadness or a replacement for genuine emotional processing. But in everyday life, during moments of stress, fatigue, or minor frustration, a smile can act as a subtle mental nudge toward a better mindset. It's a way to tell your brain, things aren't so bad, even before you fully believe it. And because emotional states are fluid, that small nudge can sometimes be enough to change the direction of your mood. The beauty of this trick is that it requires no equipment, no time commitment, and no special conditions. You can try it while sitting at your desk, walking down the street, or waiting in line. The key is not to wait until you feel like smiling, but to use the smile as a tool, a physical cue that signals to your mind that it's safe to relax, to find something amusing, or to soften the edges of whatever stress you're carrying. In short, smiling is more than just an effect of happiness, it can be a cause. It's a small gesture that leverages the powerful link between body and mind, allowing you to influence how you feel by simply changing your expression. When you smile, you're not faking happiness, you're helping to create it. Use emotion to boost memory. Memory is not a purely logical function of the brain, it is deeply intertwined with emotion. We tend to forget ordinary days but vividly remember moments that made us laugh, cry, fear, or feel awe. This isn't accidental, it's how the brain is designed. One powerful psychological trick to improve learning and memory is to deliberately engage emotion when absorbing new information. When something is emotionally charged, it becomes more meaningful to the brain, and meaning is the gateway to memory. From an evolutionary standpoint, emotion serves as a filter for importance. The brain has limited capacity to store every detail of daily experience, so it prioritizes information tied to survival, reward, or personal relevance, things that provoke a strong emotional response. Whether it's the joy of a first kiss, the anxiety before a big speech, or the fear from a near accident, emotionally intense experiences create stronger neural connections, making them easier to recall later. This same principle can be applied to everyday learning. When you associate a piece of information with an emotional response, you make it stand out. For example, if you're trying to remember a historical date, imagine what it would feel like to live in that time, the fear, excitement, or hardship people might have faced. If you're studying vocabulary in a new language, connect each word with a personal story, a funny image, or something that makes you smile or cringe. The emotional charge adds weight to the memory. Emotion also increases focus. People naturally pay more attention to things that stir feeling, which in turn enhances encoding, the process by which information is committed to memory. Dry facts often slip away because they don't capture the brain's attention. But if those facts are wrapped in a personal narrative, a surprising metaphor, or a dramatic contrast, they're far more likely to stick. Teachers, advertisers, and storytellers all use this technique, because they know that emotion engages the brain on a deeper level than logic alone. Even negative emotions, when used carefully, can boost memory. A sense of urgency, mild stress, or frustration can signal to the brain that something matters. That's why people often remember moments of embarrassment or anger with crystal clarity. However, too much stress can backfire, impairing memory rather than helping it, so emotional intensity should be balanced and constructive. Another way emotion enhances memory is through chemical changes in the brain. When you experience something emotional, your body releases neurotransmitters like dopamine and adrenaline. These chemicals help strengthen the neural pathways involved in storing memories, acting like glue that binds experiences together. This is why people often remember emotionally significant events with greater detail and accuracy than neutral ones. To make the most of this trick, intentionally inject emotion into the material you're learning. Use imagery, storytelling, personal connections, humor, or music. Don't just memorize facts, relate them to something that matters to you. Make the learning experience more vivid, more surprising, or more meaningful, even if you have to exaggerate the emotional context a bit. The brain remembers what the heart feels. In the end, emotion is not a distraction from learning, it's a shortcut to deeper, more lasting memory. By tying what you want to remember to how you feel, you engage both the logical and emotional parts of the brain, creating a richer and more resilient memory. This technique turns passive studying into active experience, making knowledge not just something you store, but something you feel. Touch the arm lightly when making a request. Touching someone lightly on the arm when making a request is a subtle yet surprisingly effective psychological trick that can significantly increase the chances of compliance, connection, and cooperation. Though it may seem like a minor gesture, this brief and respectful form of touch taps into deep-rooted social instincts that influence how we respond to others. Human beings are wired to respond to touch. It's one of the most primal forms of communication, predating spoken language. A light touch on the arm, particularly during a conversation, activates a sense of social closeness and trust. It conveys warmth, attention, and presence. When done with the right timing and context, it signals that you are not just speaking at someone, but genuinely engaging with them. Psychological studies have repeatedly shown that a light, non-intrusive touch can increase compliance with requests, often dramatically. In one classic study, researchers found that waiters who lightly touched a patron's arm or shoulder when returning change received significantly higher tips than those who didn't. Similarly, in experiments where strangers were asked to do small favors, like answering a survey or lending an item, those who were touched lightly on the arm were far more likely to agree. Why does this work? First, physical touch, when appropriate, subtly increases feelings of connection and empathy. It humanizes the interaction. The person being touched is more likely to perceive the request as personal rather than transactional. It also creates a fleeting but powerful sense of mutual attention, signaling that the requester is fully present and emotionally attuned. Second, touch can serve as a confidence cue. People who touch others appropriately during conversation are often perceived as more confident and persuasive. The act shows comfort with personal boundaries and suggests social fluency. When you lightly touch someone on the arm while making a request, you unconsciously communicate, "I believe you'll listen to me, and I feel secure enough to engage with you at this level." Of course, context and cultural sensitivity are crucial. The touch must be brief, light, and respectful. Anything more can feel invasive or manipulative. The ideal moment is a quick touch on the upper arm or forearm during a natural pause or emphasis in speech. The relationship, setting, and individual comfort levels all matter greatly. What feels friendly in one context may feel inappropriate in another, so attunement to social cues is essential. When done properly, this small gesture can soften resistance, deepen rapport, and increase your influence, often without the other person even realizing why they feel more inclined to say yes. It works because it bypasses pure logic and taps into nonverbal emotional circuitry, reinforcing the human bond behind the request. In short, a light touch on the arm isn't just physical, it's psychological. It builds subtle bridges of trust, warmth, and receptiveness, turning a simple request into a moment of meaningful connection. Break big tasks into microtasks. Breaking big tasks into microtasks is a psychological trick that turns overwhelming goals into manageable, actionable steps, transforming anxiety and procrastination into momentum and progress. While the concept may seem obvious, its power lies in how it engages the brain's motivational systems and bypasses the psychological resistance that large or abstract tasks often trigger. When we face a large task, writing a report, starting a new project, organizing a room, our brain often registers it as vague and intimidating. It lacks clear edges, and that ambiguity creates friction. We don't know exactly where to begin, how long it will take, or whether we'll be successful. This uncertainty can paralyze motivation and activate avoidance behaviors like procrastination, distraction, or even anxiety. The task looms in the background, unfinished and untouched, feeding feelings of guilt or self-doubt. But when we break that large task into microtasks, small, clearly defined actions, we create a sense of clarity and control. Instead of write the report, the first microtask becomes open a new document, followed by write the first sentence of the introduction, and so on. These small actions don't just feel easier, they are easier, because they require less mental energy and willpower to initiate. Each step becomes a miniature win, which produces a subtle but meaningful reward in the brain. This ties directly into the dopamine system, which is heavily involved in motivation. Dopamine isn't released only when we complete a big goal, it spikes even during the process of making progress. When you check off a microtask, no matter how small, your brain receives a burst of satisfaction. This positive feedback reinforces the behavior and encourages you to keep going. It creates a psychological snowball effect. One small action leads to another, and soon you're building real momentum. Microtasking also helps overcome the all-or-nothing thinking that often stops people from starting a project in the first place. When tasks are broken down into bite-sized pieces, perfectionism loses its grip. You don't need to write a perfect report, you just need to draft a rough first paragraph. This shift reduces pressure and makes action more inviting. Additionally, microtasks create measurable progress. Each completed step gives you a clear visual cue that you're moving forward. This builds confidence and reduces stress, especially when tackling long-term or emotionally draining projects. It also improves planning and time management by allowing you to estimate how long individual parts take, rather than being lost in a fog of a massive goal. In short, breaking big tasks into micro-tasks is not just a productivity technique, it's a psychological strategy. It helps you sidestep fear and inertia, engage your brain's reward system, and regain a sense of agency. In a world where overwhelming to-do lists are common and mental fatigue is real, this trick turns chaos into order and intentions into action, one small step at a time. Expectations shape perception. What we expect to see, hear, or experience often determines what we actually perceive. This psychological phenomenon, where expectations shape perception, is rooted in how the brain interprets information. Rather than receiving the world in a purely objective, neutral way, the mind constantly filters and frames experience through the lens of what it anticipates. This means that our expectations can bend reality, subtly influencing how we interpret everything from a conversation to a physical sensation, a facial expression, or even a memory. The brain is not a passive recording device, it's an active prediction machine. Every second, it takes in vast amounts of sensory data and compares it to patterns it already knows. Expectations, formed through past experiences, beliefs, emotions, and context, act as mental templates. When incoming information matches those templates, the brain fills in the blanks quickly and effortlessly. But when there's ambiguity or uncertainty, expectation becomes the deciding factor. We often see what we expect to see, even when it's not fully there. This principle shows up in countless ways. In social settings, if we expect someone to be rude, we're more likely to interpret their neutral actions as cold or dismissive. If we believe a task will be difficult, we're more likely to struggle with it, even if it's objectively simple. In medicine, this is the mechanism behind the placebo effect. When a person expects a treatment to work, the body often responds as if it has received real healing. Their perception of pain diminishes, not because of the treatment itself, but because of the mind's belief in its effectiveness. Marketing and branding exploit this concept constantly. A product in luxury packaging is often rated as higher quality than the same item in plain wrapping. People might enjoy a wine more if they're told it's expensive, even if it's not. Their expectations change their actual sensory experience, not just their opinion. The brain unconsciously adjusts perception to match the story it's already told itself. This doesn't only happen with positive expectations. Negative assumptions can have equally powerful effects. A student who believes they're bad at math may perform worse on tests, not because of actual ability, but because their expectation undermines focus and confidence. In relationships, if someone expects to be rejected or hurt, they may misread others' intentions or behave defensively, which ironically makes rejection more likely. Understanding that expectations shape perception helps in two important ways. First, it reveals how much control we have over our own experience. By consciously adjusting expectations, approaching situations with curiosity rather than fear, for example, we can change how we interpret and respond to the world. Second, it offers empathy. Realizing that others are also seeing the world through the lens of their expectations makes their reactions more understandable, even when we don't agree with them. This psychological trick isn't just a quirk of the mind, it's a core function of human perception. The brain simplifies a complex, overwhelming world by predicting what will happen next. It does this to save time and energy, and most of the time it works. But it also means our perception is always a blend of what's real and what we believe is real. By becoming aware of this, we gain a quiet but profound power, the ability to reshape how we experience life, simply by reshaping what we expect from it. Let others talk about themselves. Let others talk about themselves is a deceptively simple yet profoundly effective psychological technique that builds rapport, trust, and likability. At its heart, this trick leverages a basic human truth: people love to talk about themselves. Doing so activates the brain's reward system, producing feelings of pleasure similar to those experienced from food, money, or even physical affection. By giving others the space to speak about themselves, you not only make them feel good, you make them feel good about you. In social and professional situations, there's often a temptation to prove value by being impressive, sharing achievements, stories, or opinions. But ironically, what makes people find you most engaging isn't how interesting you are, it's how interested you are in them. When someone feels genuinely listened to, they associate you with warmth, safety, and importance. You become, in their mind, a person who gets it, even if you said very little. Allowing others to talk about themselves signals respect, attentiveness, and validation. It communicates that their thoughts and experiences are worth hearing, which satisfies a deep psychological need for recognition. As a result, they're more likely to lower their defenses, open up, and feel a stronger connection. This is why effective leaders, negotiators, and even therapists often do more listening than speaking. They understand that giving others the stage builds trust and insight. This technique also offers practical advantages. By letting people talk freely, you learn their priorities, concerns, and motivations. This information can be incredibly useful in tailoring your responses, whether you're trying to persuade someone, solve a conflict, or build a meaningful relationship. Listening more than you speak isn't just courteous, it's strategic. Crucially, this doesn't mean sitting silently and nodding, it means being actively present. Ask open-ended questions. Show curiosity. Follow up on what they share. Your attention must be real. People can spot a disengaged listener just as easily as a fake smile. But when your interest is genuine, the psychological payoff for the other person is powerful. In essence, let others talk about themselves is less about stepping back and more about stepping into someone else's world. It transforms interactions from transactions into connections, and leaves people walking away feeling valued, and thinking highly of you because of it. Keep your hands visible. Keeping your hands visible is one of the most fundamental, and often overlooked, psychological tricks for building trust, demonstrating confidence, and increasing your influence in any social or professional interaction. Though it may seem like a small detail, this simple act taps into deep-seated instincts shaped by thousands of years of human evolution. At its core, visible hands signal honesty and openness. From an evolutionary standpoint, hands are potential tools of both creation and harm. In early human societies, not being able to see someone's hands could mean danger. It introduced uncertainty and risk. This ancient instinct still lives in our subconscious. When someone hides their hands, whether in pockets, behind their back, under a table, or tightly folded, observers may feel uneasy or suspicious without knowing why. Their brain registers, something might be concealed, either literally or emotionally. On the flip side, visible hands instantly reduce tension. Open palms, especially when gesturing while speaking, are read as a sign of transparency. They suggest that a person has nothing to hide, that their intentions are sincere, and that they are willing to engage. This is why, for example, politicians, teachers, and skilled public speakers often keep their gestures expressive and hands in view. It makes them seem more genuine, more relatable, and more trustworthy. From a psychological perspective, keeping your hands visible also enhances nonverbal clarity. Hands are powerful communication tools. When you gesture naturally as you speak, it helps your listener understand and retain your message better. Studies in cognitive psychology have found that gestures not only help the speaker organize their thoughts but also improve the listener's comprehension. The mind responds positively to movement that is congruent with speech. It feels authentic and confident. Moreover, visible hands reinforce a sense of control and confidence. People who are nervous or unsure often try to shrink their body language, including hiding their hands. In contrast, someone who lets their hands rest calmly on a table, gestures openly, or keeps them unclenched and relaxed appears at ease with themselves and their surroundings. This posture conveys psychological ownership of the space, a subtle but potent marker of authority. In interpersonal dynamics, whether you're in a job interview, a date, a negotiation, or a leadership role, keeping your hands visible helps to foster psychological safety. It says, "I am approachable. I am not a threat. You can trust me." In summary, the visibility of your hands isn't just a body language footnote, it's a foundational element of how others judge your intent, your character, and your confidence. By making a conscious effort to keep your hands in sight, you're using a primal, powerful tool to build connection, reduce tension, and project presence without saying a single word. Chew gum to appear calm. Chewing gum may seem like a casual or even mindless habit, but psychologically, it can be a surprisingly effective trick to appear calm and in control, especially in stressful or high-pressure environments. This simple action sends subtle signals to others, and even to your own brain, that can change the emotional tone of a situation. From a psychological standpoint, chewing is associated with comfort and safety. In evolutionary terms, animals, including humans, only eat when they feel safe. You don't chew when you're in danger, you fight, flee, or freeze. So when someone sees you chewing gum, even unconsciously, their brain registers that you must feel at ease in your environment. As a result, you appear more relaxed, confident, and emotionally composed. This perception can be especially valuable in situations like public speaking, interviews, negotiations, or social encounters where nervousness might be expected. While you obviously wouldn't chew gum during a speech or meeting, doing so beforehand can help you trick your nervous system into staying calm. The repetitive, rhythmic motion of chewing can reduce cortisol, the stress hormone, stabilize breathing, and keep your jaw relaxed, physiological changes that communicate calmness both internally and externally. There's also a behavioral science principle at play called self-regulation through mimicry. People tend to mirror the energy or tension of those around them. If you appear calm, even if it's only because you're chewing gum, others are likely to feel more at ease around you too. This can be useful in tense settings like conflict resolution or negotiations, where emotional tone plays a big role in outcomes. Interestingly, studies have shown that chewing gum can improve focus and concentration, which further adds to your composed appearance. It helps prevent fidgeting, reduces distracting habits like nail biting or leg shaking, and gives your brain a mild anchor point during moments of anxiety. However, the key to using this trick effectively lies in context and subtlety. In casual or informal settings, chewing gum can enhance your image as calm and approachable. In more formal scenarios, it's best used as a preparatory tool rather than a visible behavior. Think of it as a psychological warm-up. You chew gum privately before stepping into the room, calming your nerves and settling your body language before it matters most. In essence, chewing gum acts as both a physical cue and a mental signal. It says, "I'm not threatened. I'm in control." And in the social jungle of human interaction, that quiet confidence often makes all the difference. Chunk information. When faced with a large amount of information, the human brain quickly becomes overwhelmed. Whether trying to memorize a phone number, learn a new skill, or study for an exam, too much raw data at once can lead to mental fatigue, forgetfulness, and confusion. One of the most effective psychological tricks for managing and retaining information is called chunking. This strategy involves breaking down complex material into smaller, manageable groups, or chunks, that the brain can process more easily and remember more effectively. Chunking works by taking advantage of the brain's natural tendency to seek patterns and organize information. Instead of trying to remember a long, unbroken stream of data, you group related elements together so they become a single, coherent unit. For example, trying to memorize the number sequence 1492177611941 can be nearly impossible if treated as one long string. But when chunked as 1492, the year Columbus sailed, 1776, American independence, and 1941, Pearl Harbor, it becomes much easier to remember. Each chunk taps into prior knowledge and associations, giving the brain an anchor. The psychological roots of chunking lie in our limited short-term memory capacity. Most people can hold around 7 ± 2 pieces of information at a time in working memory, as famously proposed by psychologist George Miller. But a piece of information can be expanded through chunking. For example, a trained chess player can look at a board and remember the position of 20 or more pieces because they don't see 20 individual items, they see patterns, like common formations or threats, which they store as single mental chunks. To a beginner, that same board just looks like chaos. Chunking is not only useful for memorization but also for learning complex skills or concepts. Musicians don't memorize every note individually, they learn musical phrases. Athletes don't focus on every single body movement, they internalize sequences. Even in reading, we don't process each letter one by one, we chunk them into words, and then into phrases and meanings. This compression of information allows the brain to store more, retrieve it faster, and use it more flexibly. To use chunking effectively, it helps to organize information in a way that highlights relationships and meaning. Instead of trying to memorize a list of unrelated facts, look for patterns, categories, or overarching ideas that can group items together. Creating acronyms, using visual diagrams, or breaking text into bullet points are all forms of chunking. The key is to restructure information so it feels smaller and more coherent. Chunking also gets more powerful with practice and expertise. As you become more familiar with a subject, you naturally begin to recognize larger and more complex chunks. What once seemed like dozens of disconnected facts become a few interconnected concepts. This is why experts seem to remember and process so much more than beginners, not because they have better memory, but because they've developed richer, more efficient mental structures. Ultimately, chunking is about working with the brain's natural strengths rather than against them. By organizing information into meaningful groups, you reduce cognitive load, enhance retention, and make learning less intimidating. It transforms the overwhelming into the understandable, helping you absorb more and forget less, one chunk at a time. Door-in-the-face technique. The door-in-the-face technique is a persuasive psychological tactic that works by leveraging contrast and social pressure to increase the likelihood of agreement. It operates on a simple but effective principle: start with a large, often unreasonable request that is likely to be refused, and then follow it up with a smaller, more realistic request, the one you actually wanted all along. The stark contrast between the two makes the second request seem more modest by comparison, and people are far more likely to comply. This technique plays on the natural human tendency to reciprocate concessions. When someone makes a big ask and then backs down to a smaller one, it feels as though they're making a compromise. And in turn, we often feel socially obligated to meet them halfway by agreeing to their next offer. It's as if the refusal of the first request opens a kind of psychological door, and the second, more reasonable request slips in with much less resistance. For example, imagine someone asks you to donate $500 to a cause. You decline, understandably. Then they quickly follow up with, "Well, even $20 would help." Suddenly, $20 feels like a small gesture compared to the $500. While you may not have agreed to a $20 donation if that had been the first request, now it seems reasonable, even generous of them to reduce the demand. And so, you're more likely to say yes. The brilliance of the door-in-the-face technique lies in how it manipulates perception and emotion. The initial refusal creates a subtle tension or guilt in the person being asked. When the requester relents, it gives the impression of compromise or goodwill, which invites a reciprocal response. People generally want to be seen as fair, cooperative, and kind, and this technique takes advantage of that self-image. This method is widely used in sales, fundraising, negotiations, and even interpersonal relationships. A teenager might ask their parents for a week-long trip with friends, get denied, and then ask for just a weekend away, something the parents are now more likely to approve. A car dealer might show you a high-end, overpriced model first, making the mid-range car you end up buying seem far more acceptable. However, for the door-in-the-face technique to be effective, the initial request must be large enough to be rejected, but not so outrageous that it feels manipulative or offensive. If the first ask is too absurd, the entire interaction can come across as insincere, and trust is lost. Timing also matters. The second request should follow closely after the first, so the contrast remains sharp and the sense of concession is felt. From a psychological standpoint, this technique works because of contrast bias, commitment dynamics, and the desire to maintain social harmony. It exploits the way people compare options and how they strive to be consistent with social norms. Once you're aware of it, you'll begin to recognize it everywhere, from commercials to customer service calls, from political fundraising to personal favors. Understanding the door-in-the-face technique doesn't just protect you from being influenced, it also gives you a powerful tool to use ethically. By structuring requests in this way, you can increase your chances of cooperation, so long as your intention is honest and the smaller request is one you believe is fair. In the end, it's not just about getting someone to say yes. It's about understanding how human psychology frames choices, and how easily perception can be shifted with just one extra step. Exhale longer than you inhale. Breathing is one of the few bodily functions that is both automatic and under conscious control. That makes it a powerful tool for influencing our mental and emotional state, especially in moments of stress, anxiety, or overwhelm. A particularly effective psychological trick is to exhale longer than you inhale. This simple shift in your breathing pattern can trigger a cascade of calming effects in the nervous system, helping you feel more grounded, focused, and at ease. At the heart of this technique is the autonomic nervous system, which regulates unconscious bodily functions like heart rate, digestion, and respiratory rate. It has two main branches: the sympathetic nervous system, which prepares the body for action, the fight or flight response, and the parasympathetic nervous system, which promotes rest, relaxation, and recovery, the rest and digest state. The breath serves as a bridge between these two systems. When you breathe quickly or shallowly, especially through the chest, it activates the sympathetic response and signals the body to stay alert. In contrast, slow, controlled breathing, especially with a longer exhale, activates the parasympathetic system and tells the body it's safe to relax. Exhaling longer than you inhale subtly shifts the balance between these systems. For example, if you breathe in for a count of 4 and out for a count of 6, your body begins to slow the heart rate, reduce blood pressure, and release muscle tension. The vagus nerve, which runs from the brainstem to the abdomen and plays a major role in calming the body, is particularly responsive during exhalation. A long, smooth exhale sends a message through this nerve that all is well, effectively dialing down the body's stress response. This technique also quiets mental chatter. When you're anxious or overstimulated, your thoughts tend to race, and your breath becomes shallow and erratic. By focusing on elongating the exhale, you bring attention back to the body, slow down mental noise, and cultivate a sense of control. It's a physical action that has a psychological benefit, not just because of the biological changes, but because it reinforces a sense of agency in how you manage your state. Importantly, this trick is both fast and discreet. You don't need to meditate, lie down, or go somewhere private. You can do it in a meeting, in traffic, while walking, or lying in bed. A few cycles, inhale for 4 counts, exhale for 6, can be enough to shift your physiology and your mindset. For even deeper calm, some people extend the exhale to a count of 8 or more, as long as it remains comfortable and smooth. This method is not about suppressing emotion or pretending to be calm, it's about giving the body a chance to recalibrate and allowing the mind to follow. Rather than trying to force your thoughts to quiet or your mood to change, you go through the body, through the breath, to create space for that change to happen naturally. It's an elegant, low-effort way to regulate your nervous system and steer yourself toward balance. In essence, breathing out longer than you breathe in is like pressing the body's internal reset button. It's a tiny physiological shift with outsized psychological impact, helping you move from reactivity to responsiveness, from tension to clarity. It's always available, it's entirely free, and it starts with a single exhale. Mirror their energy in conflict. Mirror their energy in conflict is a subtle but powerful psychological technique used to de-escalate tension and foster understanding during emotionally charged interactions. At its core, this method involves matching, not mocking or mimicking, the emotional intensity, tone, and rhythm of the other person's behavior in order to create psychological alignment. It signals empathy and builds a subconscious bridge of rapport, even when the content of the disagreement remains unchanged. When someone is angry, agitated, or defensive, responding in a calm, overly composed manner can sometimes make them feel unheard or patronized. Instead, if you reflect a similar level of emotional intensity, without escalating the conflict, you show that you're taking their feelings seriously. For example, if someone is speaking passionately and rapidly about a grievance, responding with a slightly elevated voice and increased verbal urgency, rather than flat calmness, conveys that you are attuned to their emotional state. This mirroring doesn't mean shouting if they shout, or being aggressive if they're aggressive. It's about matching their energy, not their aggression. If they are animated and expressive, you become more engaged and responsive. If they speak in short, clipped sentences, you adjust your communication style to match that rhythm. By doing this, you lower their psychological resistance, the person feels psychologically met, which often leads to a decrease in defensiveness. Once rapport is established through this energetic mirroring, you can gradually guide the interaction toward a calmer and more constructive tone. This is known as leading after pacing. You meet them where they are, pacing, then slowly shift the energy downward, leading, encouraging de-escalation without forcing it. People tend to unconsciously follow the emotional trajectory of someone who has first validated their state. In essence, mirror their energy in conflict is a form of emotional judo, using the momentum of the other person's emotional force not to oppose, but to redirect toward resolution. Notice feet. When trying to understand what someone is truly thinking or feeling, most people instinctively focus on facial expressions or words. But one of the most revealing, and often overlooked, sources of emotional truth lies much lower, a person's feet. While faces can lie and voices can be trained, feet are far less conscious in their movements. They're controlled more by the limbic system, the part of the brain responsible for instinctive, emotional reactions. This makes observing feet a subtle yet powerful psychological trick for reading unspoken cues. The reason feet are so telling is because most people aren't aware that their lower body is communicating anything at all. People are trained from a young age to monitor their face, how they smile, make eye contact, or express interest. But feet? They tend to move and position themselves without much deliberate control. This unconscious behavior reveals genuine feelings, particularly in moments of stress, discomfort, or deception. For example, if two people are standing and speaking, and one person's feet are pointed directly at the other, that usually indicates interest and engagement. But if the feet are angled away, toward the door, an exit, or elsewhere, it often signals a desire to leave or withdraw from the interaction, even if their face appears friendly and engaged. Similarly, if someone suddenly crosses their feet tightly or begins fidgeting, it may indicate nervousness or anxiety. These cues often show up before the person is even aware of their emotional shift. Feet also reveal dynamics in group interactions. In a conversation involving multiple people, you can often detect who feels connected or excluded just by observing foot placement. If someone's body and feet are directed toward the center of a group, they're likely feeling included and attentive. If their torso is facing the group but their feet are turned away, they may be mentally checking out, unsure, or even looking for an excuse to leave. This trick becomes especially useful in situations where people are trying to appear calm, confident, or agreeable while concealing stress or disinterest. A job candidate might sit upright and smile during an interview, but their foot constantly tapping or pointing toward the door may betray nervousness or eagerness to escape. In negotiations, someone may verbally express agreement, yet subtly shift their feet away, an early sign they're not fully on board or might back out. Noticing feet isn't about making snap judgments, but rather adding a layer of insight to what people are really communicating. It's a reminder that body language extends far beyond the face and hands. When combined with other nonverbal cues, foot behavior helps create a more complete picture of a person's state of mind, especially in high-stakes or emotionally charged interactions. By training yourself to glance down occasionally during conversations, you develop a quiet observational skill that most people overlook. It doesn't require confrontation or questioning, just silent attention. And the more you notice, the more you begin to see patterns, how confidence, discomfort, excitement, or dishonesty all find expression in the most grounded part of the body. In essence, feet are honest. They point, shift, retreat, or stay firmly planted in ways that reveal what someone might be unwilling, or unable, to say out loud. Learning to notice them gives you an edge in reading others and navigating social dynamics with greater intuition and awareness. Pause before responding in conflict. Pause before responding in conflict is a subtle yet profoundly effective psychological strategy that helps diffuse tension, regain control over emotions, and improve the quality of communication in heated moments. It operates on a simple principle: the space between stimulus and response is where clarity and choice exist. By inserting even a brief pause before reacting, you shift from instinctive reaction to deliberate action, turning a potential escalation into an opportunity for resolution. Conflict often activates the body's fight-or-flight response. Heart rate increases, the mind races, and people become more reactive and less rational. In this heightened emotional state, words can be impulsive and easily misunderstood. A quick, defensive reply might feel satisfying in the moment, but it often fans the flames rather than calming them. The pause interrupts this cycle. Pausing doesn't have to be long, it can be a few seconds of silence, a deep breath, or even a calm verbal cue like, "Let me think about that for a moment." This small break serves several functions. First, it gives your emotional brain time to settle, reducing the likelihood of a regretful outburst. Second, it allows you to gather your thoughts, clarify your intention, and choose words that are more constructive and measured. Third, it subtly changes the rhythm of the interaction, slowing down the tempo and signaling to the other person that you're not here to escalate, but to understand and engage. Interestingly, this moment of silence also has a psychological effect on the other person. When you don't respond immediately, it creates a brief vacuum that often compels them to reflect on what they just said. Sometimes, they soften their tone or add clarification, simply because your silence made them self-aware. Your pause becomes a mirror. Moreover, when you pause, you project composure and emotional intelligence. It shows that you're not being controlled by the moment but are in control of yourself. This can be especially powerful in leadership or negotiation settings, where your response sets the tone for the entire exchange. In essence, pause before responding in conflict isn't about avoiding confrontation, it's about meeting it with clarity instead of chaos. It grants you the space to respond with intention, not impulse, and often transforms a destructive conversation into a meaningful one. Scarcity principle. The scarcity principle is a deeply ingrained psychological phenomenon that influences how we assign value to things. At its core, the idea is simple: we tend to desire what is limited, rare, or in short supply. When something becomes less available, it often feels more desirable, not necessarily because it's better, but because our brains are wired to associate scarcity with worth, urgency, and opportunity. This instinct isn't just cultural or emotional, it's evolutionary. Throughout human history, things that were scarce, food, shelter, resources, were often crucial for survival. As a result, scarcity now triggers a sense of importance and immediate action, even when there's no real threat involved. This principle shows up constantly in everyday life, especially in marketing, relationships, and decision-making. A product labeled limited edition or only 3 left in stock immediately feels more appealing. The item hasn't changed, but its apparent scarcity increases our motivation to act. We fear missing out. That emotional response, known as loss aversion, drives people to make choices faster, with less rational scrutiny, simply because the opportunity might disappear. Scarcity also creates competition. When people perceive that a resource is limited, they often become more aggressive or committed to acquiring it. This is seen in everything from Black Friday sales to high-demand concert tickets. The presence of others wanting the same scarce thing only amplifies its perceived value. It becomes a race, and the item becomes not just something we want, but something we feel we must get before someone else does. Interestingly, the scarcity principle can even apply to abstract things, like time, attention, or access. If a person seems busy or hard to reach, others may find them more intriguing or important. If an opportunity has a deadline, it feels more serious. Even in romantic contexts, someone who appears less available can seem more attractive, not necessarily because of who they are, but because their availability is limited. The brain interprets scarcity as a sign of high status or quality. This trick works because scarcity disrupts our usual decision-making process. It pushes us out of a reflective state and into a reactive one. When faced with limited availability, we often focus less on whether we actually want the thing and more on the idea that we might lose our chance. That urgency hijacks our judgment. The mere possibility of regret, of not acting in time, can override caution and push us toward impulsive choices. But understanding the scarcity principle also gives us power. It allows us to pause and ask whether we truly want something, or if we're simply being manipulated by its perceived rarity. Once we recognize this psychological pressure for what it is, we can reclaim our ability to make more rational, value-based decisions. And on the flip side, if used ethically, scarcity can be a useful tool to create focus, set boundaries, or highlight genuine value, such as offering a limited-time service or prioritizing relationships that respect your time. In essence, the scarcity principle is a reminder of how easily perception can override reason. When we believe something is about to slip away, we grasp at it more tightly, whether or not it's truly valuable to us. By seeing this pattern clearly, we don't have to be driven by it blindly. We can recognize when urgency is real, and when it's just a shadow cast by scarcity. Show genuine enthusiasm. Show genuine enthusiasm is a psychological strategy that taps into the contagious nature of emotions, particularly positive ones. Enthusiasm, when authentic, has a magnetic effect on others. It creates emotional engagement, fosters trust, and increases the likelihood that people will respond positively to your ideas, requests, or presence. At its root, this technique is about using sincere excitement as a bridge to influence and connection. Human beings are wired to mirror the emotional states of those around them, a process rooted in mirror neurons in the brain. When someone expresses genuine enthusiasm, whether through tone of voice, facial expressions, body language, or word choice, it tends to evoke a mirrored emotional response. This is especially powerful in social, professional, or persuasive settings, where energy and attitude can influence outcomes just as much as content. For example, if you're recommending a new idea to a team, sharing a story with a friend, or inviting someone to join a project, your excitement signals that you believe in what you're saying. And when others sense that belief, they are far more likely to be receptive. People don't just buy into ideas, they buy into the energy behind them. Importantly, this trick only works when the enthusiasm is genuine. People have a finely tuned radar for insincerity, and forced or exaggerated excitement can come across as manipulative or inauthentic. True enthusiasm stems from being present, caring about what you're talking about, and wanting to share that energy with others. It's not about being loud or overly animated, it's about showing visible signs of investment, such as brightened eyes, an uplifted tone, active engagement, and emotionally charged words. When used appropriately, showing genuine enthusiasm can strengthen rapport by making others feel emotionally included. Inspire motivation and curiosity in otherwise neutral or skeptical audiences. Create a positive emotional atmosphere that improves cooperation and openness. In short, genuine enthusiasm signals that something matters to you, and that alone is often enough to make others take a closer look at why it should matter to them, too. Sit side by side during difficult conversations. Sitting side by side during difficult conversations is a subtle but highly effective psychological trick that can significantly reduce tension, encourage cooperation, and promote emotional safety. While most people instinctively default to face-to-face interactions when discussing serious matters, this arrangement can unintentionally create a sense of confrontation. By simply changing your physical position, shifting from across to beside, you transform the emotional tone of the exchange in profound ways. When you sit directly across from someone, especially at a table or desk, it can evoke a subconscious feeling of opposition. The setup resembles a negotiation or a debate, where each person takes their side. This physical alignment often intensifies defensiveness, as the person may feel scrutinized, judged, or even challenged. Eye contact becomes more prolonged and intense, which in sensitive moments can heighten emotional vulnerability or trigger a fight-or-flight response. In contrast, sitting side by side, or at a slight angle, reduces the perceived threat. It shifts the dynamic from you versus me to you and me against the problem. This layout subtly implies partnership. You are not facing off, you are facing forward, together. As a result, it encourages more collaborative thinking, especially when navigating delicate topics like relationship issues, feedback, disagreements, or emotionally charged decisions. This technique also leverages what psychologists call non-confrontational positioning. Without the constant gaze and direct body orientation that come with face-to-face seating, people are more likely to speak honestly and listen openly. It becomes easier to admit vulnerability or express difficult emotions when you don't feel on the spot. This is one reason why people often open up more during side-by-side activities like driving, walking, or sitting on a bench. The lack of direct eye contact feels safer. In professional settings, sitting next to someone when delivering criticism or discussing a challenging issue signals empathy and solidarity. It conveys, "I'm here with you, not against you." This physical closeness, when respectful and appropriate, can also enhance rapport and reduce psychological distance. It reinforces that you're on the same team, working toward a mutual resolution rather than seeking to dominate or win. Of course, this trick must be used with intention and sensitivity. In some situations, particularly those requiring authority or clear boundaries, a face-to-face setup may still be appropriate. But when the goal is to ease tension, foster emotional safety, and promote genuine dialogue, sitting side by side is one of the most quietly powerful tools at your disposal. In essence, how you sit speaks before you even open your mouth. And when the conversation is hard, positioning yourself as an ally, not an opponent, can make all the difference in how your message is received. Use spaced repetition. Learning something once is rarely enough to remember it for the long term. Most people have had the experience of reading a chapter, feeling like they understand it, and then forgetting everything a week later. One powerful psychological trick that dramatically improves memory and retention is spaced repetition. This method works by reintroducing information at increasing intervals over time, taking advantage of how the brain strengthens memories through repeated, well-timed exposure. At its core, spaced repetition is based on a simple insight: we forget things gradually, not all at once. When we first learn something, our memory of it is fragile and fades quickly. But each time we review that information, especially just as we're on the verge of forgetting it, we strengthen the memory and make it more durable. By spacing out the review sessions so they align with the natural curve of forgetting, we can preserve knowledge far more efficiently than by cramming. This principle contrasts sharply with how most people study. Traditional methods like rereading notes or mass practice, repeating something over and over in a short time, might feel productive in the moment, but they lead to rapid decay in memory. That's because these methods don't give the brain enough time to forget and then reconstruct the memory, which is what truly cements it. Spaced repetition forces the brain to retrieve the information after a delay, which makes the memory trace stronger each time. Imagine learning a new vocabulary word in a foreign language. You study it today, then again tomorrow, then 4 days later, then a week after that, and so on. Each review session happens right around the time your brain is about to let it slip. This small act of retrieval challenges the brain just enough to rebuild and reinforce the connection. Over time, the intervals between sessions can get longer and longer because the memory is now rooted deeper in your long-term memory. This technique is not just theoretical, it's backed by decades of research in cognitive psychology and has been widely implemented in tools like Anki, SuperMemo, and other flashcard systems. These tools use algorithms to calculate the optimal timing for each review, ensuring that you study efficiently rather than randomly. The result is better retention in less time. Spaced repetition is also scalable. It works for simple facts, like names or dates, as well as complex concepts in subjects like medicine, law, or language learning. In every case, the key is not how many times you review something, but when you do. It turns out that forgetting is not a failure, it's a necessary part of learning. By revisiting knowledge just before it vanishes, you create a mental workout that strengthens your recall far more than passive repetition ever could. To use spaced repetition effectively, you don't need a complicated system. You can start by reviewing new information the same day you learn it, then again the next day, then after 3 days, a week, 2 weeks, and so on. With each review, your brain holds on to the knowledge a little longer, until you no longer need to consciously rehearse it at all. In essence, spaced repetition works because it aligns with how memory truly functions, through active, repeated, and well-timed engagement. It transforms short-term understanding into long-term mastery, not by brute force, but by precision. Instead of studying harder, spaced repetition helps you study smarter, maximizing results while minimizing wasted effort. Use the power of storytelling. Use the power of storytelling is one of the most enduring and influential psychological tools in human interaction. Unlike plain facts or abstract arguments, stories activate the emotional and imaginative parts of the brain, making information more relatable, memorable, and persuasive. At its core, this technique leverages the way our brains are wired to find meaning through narrative structure, a beginning, a struggle, and a resolution. When someone hears a well-told story, they don't just process the words intellectually, they experience it. Neuroscientific research shows that stories activate not only the language processing centers of the brain but also areas associated with emotion, empathy, and even motor responses. For instance, when a story describes a person running, the listener's brain may simulate the action as if they were running themselves. This immersive quality allows storytelling to bypass analytical defenses and speak directly to the emotional core of a listener. This emotional engagement is key to persuasion. People rarely change their beliefs or behaviors based on logic alone, they need to feel something. A story provides context, human depth, and emotional texture to an idea. Instead of telling someone that a problem is important, a story shows why it matters through a lived experience. For example, a statistic about homelessness might be forgotten, but a story about one individual's journey through it, complete with setbacks and small victories, leaves a lasting impact. Storytelling is also powerful because it encourages identification. When people hear a story, they often unconsciously place themselves in the narrative. They compare, relate, and reflect on their own lives. This makes the message more personal and meaningful, creating a bond between the speaker and listener. Furthermore, stories organize complex information into a form the brain can easily digest and recall. In presentations, interviews, or negotiations, wrapping your points in a story makes them easier to follow and much more likely to stick. Instead of offering a list of dry data, you bring your audience on a journey, one with stakes, emotion, and resolution. Ultimately, the power of storytelling lies in its ability to humanize ideas. Whether you're trying to inspire, teach, persuade, or connect, a well-crafted story turns information into an experience, and experiences are what truly change minds and hearts. Anchoring effect. The anchoring effect is a powerful psychological phenomenon that shapes how people make decisions, especially when estimating values, judging quantities, or negotiating outcomes. At its core, it refers to the tendency for individuals to rely too heavily on the first piece of information they receive, that anchor, when making judgments or choices. Even if that initial reference point is arbitrary or irrelevant, it can exert a disproportionate influence on subsequent thinking. Imagine you walk into a store and see a jacket priced at $300, then discover another one for $150. The second jacket suddenly seems like a bargain, not because of its quality or value, but because your brain is subconsciously comparing it to the original $300 anchor. If, however, you had seen the $150 jacket first, you might have considered it expensive. This mental bias is the essence of the anchoring effect. Once an anchor is set, all future evaluations are adjusted relative to it, even if the anchor has no real bearing on the actual value. This effect has been repeatedly demonstrated in psychological research. In one famous experiment by Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, participants spun a wheel rigged to stop at either 10 or 65, and were then asked to estimate the percentage of African nations in the United Nations. Those who landed on 65 gave significantly higher estimates than those who landed on 10, even though the spinning wheel had no logical connection to the question. The random number acted as a cognitive anchor, silently influencing their perception of what a reasonable answer might be. The anchoring effect plays a central role in negotiations, pricing strategies, and decision-making. In business, the first price thrown out, even if wildly high, can set the tone for the entire discussion. That's why savvy negotiators often try to make the first offer, knowing it will serve as the anchor around which all future counteroffers revolve. Similarly, in retail, products are often listed with a high original price to a discounted rate. The original price, though possibly inflated, anchors the buyer's perception of value and makes the sale price seem more attractive. Even outside financial contexts, anchoring can distort how we judge people, assess risks, or make moral evaluations. First impressions, for instance, can serve as anchors in how we perceive someone's personality, even if later evidence contradicts that initial impression. Importantly, the anchoring effect works on both the conscious and subconscious levels. Even when we know that a number is random or arbitrary, its mere presence can still influence our thinking. That's what makes it so insidious, and so useful, depending on how it's employed. In short, the anchoring effect reveals just how vulnerable human judgment is to context and framing. The first number we see, the first piece of data we hear, or the first impression we form can become the mental reference point from which all subsequent thoughts are distorted. Whether you're buying, selling, negotiating, or simply making a decision, being aware of this bias can help you recognize when you're being influenced, and when you're unintentionally influencing others. Pre-commitment strategy. The pre-commitment strategy is a psychological technique that involves intentionally making a decision in advance to limit your future choices, in order to stay aligned with a long-term goal. It's based on the understanding that our future selves are often weaker, more impulsive, and more easily swayed than we'd like to admit. By pre-committing, that is, locking in a plan, decision, or consequence ahead of time, we reduce the risk of giving in to temptation, procrastination, or emotional impulses later on. This strategy stems from a fundamental truth about human psychology: we are not perfectly rational beings, and our willpower tends to fluctuate, especially in the face of short-term rewards. Pre-commitment works by recognizing this flaw and designing structures now to protect us from our weaker future selves. A classic example comes from the Greek myth of Odysseus and the Sirens. Knowing that the Sirens' song would lure him to destruction, Odysseus had his sailors tie him to the mast of his ship and ordered them not to release him, no matter how much he begged. He pre-committed himself to a course of action, acknowledging that his future state, entranced by the Sirens, would not align with his current goal, survival. That's the essence of the pre-commitment strategy, voluntarily restricting future freedom to preserve long-term values. In everyday life, pre-commitment strategies appear in many forms. Financial goals: automatically transferring part of your paycheck into a savings account or retirement fund before you have the chance to spend it. Productivity: scheduling focus blocks in your calendar, turning off notifications, or using website blockers during work hours to avoid distraction. Health: signing up and paying in advance for fitness classes, or removing junk food from the house to prevent late-night snacking. Social behavior: publicly stating a goal or deadline to increase accountability, e.g., announcing a launch date or telling friends you're quitting smoking. Psychologically, pre-commitment is a form of self-binding. creating constraints to protect your values from your future impulses. It's a powerful act of self-awareness. By pre-committing, you're acknowledging your vulnerabilities while empowering yourself to overcome them. The effectiveness of pre-commitment is also supported by behavioral economics. Studies have shown that people who make binding decisions in advance, such as using commitment contracts to quit smoking or stick to diets, are far more successful than those who rely solely on willpower. When the path is already chosen and the options are narrowed, it becomes much easier to stay the course. However, for pre-commitment to work, the strategy must be realistic, voluntary, and enforceable. If the constraints are too extreme or feel imposed, the person may rebel or abandon the plan. The best pre-commitments are those that match the person's deeper values and offer meaningful incentives, or consequences, to stay on track. In essence, the pre-commitment strategy is about planning with humility and discipline. It's an act of respect for your future self, recognizing that the greatest threats to your long-term goals often come from within. By making wise decisions today that narrow your options tomorrow, you don't limit your freedom, you preserve your freedom to succeed. Associate new habits with existing routines. Creating new habits can be challenging, especially when they feel disconnected from the flow of daily life. One effective psychological strategy to make habit formation easier is to associate the new behavior with an existing routine. Instead of trying to force a new action into your day from scratch, you anchor it to something you already do consistently. This approach uses the stability and automaticity of current habits to support and cue the formation of new ones. The brain thrives on patterns. Once a behavior becomes habitual, like brushing your teeth, making coffee, or locking the door, it gets stored in a part of the brain that handles automatic actions, allowing it to happen with minimal conscious thought. By piggybacking a new habit onto one of these reliable behaviors, you reduce the friction and mental resistance that often sabotage change. For example, rather than trying to remember to meditate at some undefined point during the day, you might decide, after I brush my teeth in the morning, I'll sit and meditate for 2 minutes. In this way, brushing your teeth becomes the trigger for the new behavior, making it much more likely to happen. This technique works because it simplifies the process of remembering and deciding when to act. One of the biggest obstacles to starting a new habit isn't the action itself, it's remembering to do it and finding the right time. By linking it to something already embedded in your routine, the new habit gains a foothold in your schedule without needing a total lifestyle overhaul. This association also reinforces the behavior neurologically. Each time you follow one action with another, you strengthen the mental connection between them. Over time, the second behavior can become just as automatic as the first. The key to using this strategy effectively is choosing an anchor habit that is already strong and occurs consistently, ideally once a day or more. It should also match the context of the new behavior in terms of time and setting. For instance, if you want to start journaling, it makes more sense to attach it to an evening ritual like putting on pajamas than to something that happens in a completely different context, like arriving at the office. The smoother the transition between the existing habit and the new one, the more natural it will feel. This method is sometimes referred to as habit stacking, and it works particularly well when the new behavior is small and easy to perform. Trying to stack a massive or complex task onto a routine can backfire by creating resistance or disrupting the original habit. Instead, start with a simple, low-effort version of the new habit: 10 squats after putting on your shoes, 1 glass of water after starting the coffee maker, or 5 minutes of reading after getting into bed. These small actions are easier to stick with and can grow gradually over time. By associating new habits with existing routines, you harness the power of structure and repetition that already exists in your life. You don't need to build motivation from the ground up every day. Instead, you create a chain reaction where one behavior naturally leads to another. This makes habit formation not just easier, but more sustainable. It's not about making your life drastically different overnight, it's about slightly modifying what you already do, in ways that steadily shape who you want to become. Interrupt patterns with unexpected kindness. Interrupt patterns with unexpected kindness is a psychological technique that disarms negativity and shifts the emotional tone of an interaction by doing something both surprising and compassionate. It works by breaking the expected script of conflict, defensiveness, or indifference, what psychologists call a pattern interrupt, and replacing it with a gesture of warmth or generosity. This sudden shift can reset a person's emotional state, making them more open, cooperative, and even reflective. In most tense or difficult exchanges, people follow familiar emotional patterns. Someone expresses frustration, and the other person gets defensive. A rude comment leads to withdrawal or retaliation. Over time, these patterns become predictable and self-reinforcing. But when you respond to hostility or coldness with unexpected kindness, genuine kindness, not sarcasm, you violate that script. You introduce emotional contrast, and that contrast disrupts the cycle. For example, imagine someone lashes out at you with criticism. The expected reaction is defensiveness or silence. But if you pause, and instead reply with something like, "I can see this really matters to you. I appreciate you being honest," you immediately alter the emotional dynamic. The other person doesn't know how to continue with their original tone, because their emotional script has been interrupted. This technique works not because it avoids conflict, but because it introduces a higher emotional intelligence into the interaction. Kindness, especially when it's unexpected, cuts through tension and forces people to reconsider their behavior. It appeals to their better nature, often bringing out empathy, guilt, or gratitude in return. There's also a neurological component at play. Unexpected acts engage the brain's attention system more intensely. Just as a surprise makes a story more memorable, a surprising act of kindness makes a moment more emotionally impactful. It captures attention, creates pause, and often allows space for transformation. However, it's crucial that the kindness be authentic. If it's manipulative or passive-aggressive, the technique backfires. But when your response is rooted in genuine empathy or a conscious choice to rise above negativity, it's remarkably powerful. In essence, interrupt patterns with unexpected kindness is a quiet form of psychological leadership. It doesn't fight fire with fire, it brings water. And often, that simple act not only diffuses the immediate situation but leaves a lasting impression that changes how others relate to you going forward. Repeat their words back to them. Repeating someone's words back to them is a deceptively simple psychological trick that builds rapport, deepens trust, and increases your persuasive power. At its heart, this technique, often called mirroring or reflective listening, taps into one of the most fundamental human needs, the desire to feel heard and understood. When you subtly repeat a person's key words or phrases, you signal that you are genuinely listening. Not just hearing, but paying close attention to their exact language. This makes the other person feel validated, which immediately lowers their psychological defenses. In emotionally charged or sensitive conversations, this sense of validation is often more important than agreement. It says, "I see you, I hear you, and I'm taking you seriously." For example, if someone says, "I've been really overwhelmed at work lately," and you respond, "It sounds like work has been really overwhelming for you," you're not offering a solution or changing the subject, you're holding up a mirror. And in that mirror, they see their emotions reflected and respected. This helps them feel safe, which encourages them to open up more and trust you further. This technique also has a practical side. People are more likely to agree with someone who echoes their language. When you use the same terms they use, rather than substituting your own, you align yourself with their worldview, even subtly. It reduces friction and increases the feeling of being on the same page. In negotiation, sales, conflict resolution, or leadership, mirroring someone's vocabulary can dramatically increase cooperation and receptiveness. From a cognitive standpoint, this works because we are drawn to familiarity. When people hear their own words repeated, it creates a sense of mental comfort and alignment. It bypasses analytical resistance and taps into the part of the brain that governs emotional recognition. It's the same reason why we feel more connected to people who share our speech patterns, accents, or humor. Importantly, repeating someone's words doesn't mean parroting everything they say. That would feel unnatural and mechanical. Effective mirroring is subtle and strategic. You echo just the key words or emotional cues, often rephrased slightly to show that you understand the meaning, not just the words. In conflict situations, this can be especially disarming. When someone is upset, repeating their concerns back to them, without judgment or contradiction, can quickly de-escalate tension. It gives them the experience of being heard before being responded to, and that alone can shift the emotional tone of the entire conversation. In summary, repeating someone's words is a quiet but powerful psychological tool. It shows presence, builds trust, and invites cooperation. In a world full of distractions and surface-level exchanges, giving someone the gift of true listening, reflected in their own words, can make you not only more persuasive, but more human. Speak slowly when you want authority. One of the most underrated psychological tricks in asserting authority is simply this: speak slowly. At first glance, it may seem like a minor detail, but in practice, the pace of your speech profoundly affects how people perceive your confidence, competence, and control. When you speak slowly, you give off the impression of deliberate thoughtfulness. It signals that you are not in a rush, not anxious to please, and certainly not uncertain. People who speak with authority tend to value their words, they take their time, and that calm, measured delivery sends a strong message: I believe what I'm saying, and you should too. Contrast this with fast talkers, who often come across as nervous, scattered, or insecure, even when they're not. Rapid speech can signal anxiety, a need to fill space, or a fear of being interrupted. It may suggest that the speaker is trying to convince rather than simply state. And the human brain instinctively associates speed with tension or instability, especially in high-stakes or formal environments. Slow speech, on the other hand, projects dominance and control. It's a behavior often seen in leaders, professors, judges, or high-status individuals. They do not rush because they expect to be heard. They pause when they wish, knowing that silence, too, holds power. Every word seems more intentional, more weighted. As a result, listeners lean in, mentally and physically, because they sense that the speaker holds something worth paying attention to. Speaking slowly also enhances clarity and comprehension. It gives your audience time to absorb your message. In moments of disagreement or negotiation, a slower tone has a calming effect. It subtly encourages the other person to match your pace, creating a more stable and thoughtful interaction. This rhythm, measured and controlled, adds gravity to your words. Moreover, slow speech can reduce the chances of making verbal errors. When you're measured in your delivery, you're also more likely to think clearly, avoid filler words like and like, and maintain composure even in difficult conversations. This adds to the perception of intelligence and emotional control, two qualities that naturally enhance authority. In short, speaking slowly doesn't just change how you sound, it changes how you're perceived. It turns your words into statements instead of pleas. It places you in the role of someone who leads the conversation, not someone chasing it. When used deliberately and authentically, slow speech is a powerful nonverbal cue that commands respect without ever having to demand it. Use because to justify requests. Using the word because to justify a request is a remarkably effective psychological trick rooted in how the human brain processes reasoning and authority. At first glance, because may seem like just a transition word, but in practice, it holds a kind of cognitive power that can dramatically increase compliance and cooperation. The power of because was famously demonstrated in a study by social psychologist Ellen Langer at Harvard. In the experiment, people were waiting in line to use a photocopier. When someone asked to cut the line with no explanation, only about 60% complied. But when the same request was made using the word because, even with a trivial reason like, because I need to make copies, compliance shot up to over 90%. The reason itself didn't matter, it was the presence of a reason, triggered by the word because, that created the effect. Why does this happen? The word because triggers a mental shortcut known as the reason-response reflex. Human brains are wired to associate because with rationality and justification. When we hear it, we automatically assume that what follows is a valid reason, and we're more likely to agree or comply, even if we don't fully analyze the logic of what's being said. This trick is especially useful in situations where you're asking someone to do something they might otherwise resist. Instead of saying, "Could you send me that report by tonight?" you might say, "Could you send me that report by tonight because I need to include it in the final review?" The addition of a reason, however minor, transforms the request into something more compelling and harder to reject. It's important to note that while the word because increases compliance, it works best when used authentically. If your reasons are perceived as dishonest, manipulative, or nonsensical, the effect can backfire. People are sensitive to insincerity, especially in emotionally or socially aware environments. But when used with truth and purpose, because makes your communication feel reasonable, grounded, and respectful of the other person's understanding. This psychological trick also builds rapport and reduces resistance. Giving someone a reason, even a small one, shows that you respect their time or effort. It appeals to their logic and emotions simultaneously. Here's why I'm asking, not just that I want something from you, but that there's a reason you can understand. In short, because is more than just a word, it's a psychological lever. It bypasses hesitation, activates cooperation, and frames your request as legitimate. In everyday life, whether you're making a favor sound reasonable, calming a disagreement, or persuading someone to take action, pairing your ask with a because can be the small shift that makes a big difference. Use implementation intentions. Most people want to make positive changes in their lives, exercising more, eating healthier, staying focused at work, but despite their best intentions, they often fall short. One psychological strategy that helps bridge the gap between what people intend to do and what they actually do is called implementation intentions. Unlike vague goals or general resolutions, implementation intentions provide a specific plan that connects a future situation with a specific action, following a simple if-then structure. For example, instead of saying, "I'll work out more," someone might say, "If it's Monday at 7 a.m., then I'll go for a 30-minute run." This small shift in phrasing is surprisingly powerful. The secret lies in how the brain responds to cues and prepares for action. When a person formulates an implementation intention, they mentally link a recognizable situation or time with a particular behavior. That link helps automate the response, so when the situation arises, the person is more likely to act without hesitation or overthinking. This works because the brain is primed to notice the cue and follow through with the prepared response, almost like pressing a play button on a mental script. This strategy reduces the need for willpower in the moment. Decision fatigue, temptation, and emotional distraction are major reasons people abandon their goals, but with an implementation intention, the decision has already been made in advance. Instead of relying on motivation or memory, the person simply responds to a trigger with a predetermined action. The clearer and more specific the plan, the better. Vague ideas like, "I'll do it later," tend to be forgotten or postponed. But a precise plan like, "If it's 6 p.m. and I'm home, then I'll cook a healthy dinner," creates a strong mental association that is more likely to be carried out. Studies have consistently shown the effectiveness of this technique. People who form implementation intentions are significantly more likely to follow through on tasks like exercising, sticking to diets, studying, or even attending medical appointments. The effect is especially noticeable in situations that involve distractions, temptations, or low motivation, where a ready-made plan makes all the difference. To make implementation intentions work, it's important to identify a clear and predictable cue, something that naturally happens during the day, such as a time, location, or emotional state. Then, attach a concrete action to that cue. The more specific both elements are, the more effective the plan will be. It's not enough to say, "If I have time," because that's too open-ended. A stronger version would be, "If I finish lunch at my desk, then I'll write for 20 minutes before checking emails." With repetition, these cues and behaviors can even turn into habits. Ultimately, implementation intentions are a way to take control of your environment and your decisions in advance, making it easier to stay aligned with your goals. They don't require massive effort, just a bit of thought up front. When used well, they shift success from something you hope for into something you've already planned. Watch their feet, not just their face. When people try to understand someone's thoughts or emotions, they naturally focus on the face, watching for smiles, frowns, raised eyebrows, or eye contact. The face, after all, is expressive and culturally taught as the primary channel for social cues. But it can also be deceptive. People consciously control their facial expressions far more than other parts of the body, especially when they want to hide what they're truly feeling. That's why a useful psychological trick, particularly in reading others more accurately, is to watch their feet, not just their face. The feet and legs are often overlooked in social interactions, but they can be remarkably honest indicators of someone's true state of mind. Unlike the face, which we're taught from a young age to manage in social settings, people rarely think about controlling their feet. Because of this, feet often reveal what a person is really feeling, especially when there's a mismatch between what they say and what they feel. This principle is commonly used in law enforcement, security, and even high-level negotiations, where reading someone's nonverbal signals can reveal discomfort, anxiety, or hidden intentions. For example, during a conversation, someone might maintain eye contact and smile politely, but if their feet are pointed away from you, toward the door or hallway, it could indicate a desire to leave or disengage. That unconscious positioning can betray impatience or discomfort even if the person's upper body appears relaxed and engaged. Similarly, rapid foot tapping, shifting weight back and forth, or shuffling may signal nervousness or agitation, especially in a setting where the person is trying to appear calm. Children are a clear example of this principle in action. A child may tell a small lie while looking straight into a parent's eyes, but their toes might fidget, curl, or shuffle awkwardly, signals they haven't yet learned to suppress. Adults are more practiced at controlling their upper body and voice tone, but their feet often remain a reliable tell, especially in high-stakes or emotionally charged situations. Even in group dynamics, feet can offer clues about social alignment. If two people are standing together and both have their feet angled toward each other, it suggests mutual engagement and interest. But if one person's feet are turned away while the others remain facing in, it may indicate that one wants to leave the interaction, even if they're still talking and nodding along. This doesn't mean feet alone tell the full story. They're just one piece of a larger puzzle, and they should be interpreted in context, alongside other body language cues and the environment. However, they offer a valuable point of reference when there's doubt or when someone's words and expressions don't quite match. Watching feet forces you to pay attention to the full body, not just the socially edited version people present from the neck up. In short, while the face may try to perform, the feet often tell the truth. By quietly observing what someone's lower body is doing, where their toes point, how they move, whether they're still or restless, you gain access to a layer of honesty that's harder to fake. It's a subtle but powerful way to see beyond the mask people wear and understand what they're really thinking or feeling underneath. The power of silence. Silence, often overlooked in a world full of noise and constant communication, holds immense psychological power. In conversation, silence is more than the absence of words. It's a deliberate pause that can shift the dynamics of a situation, reveal unspoken truths, and subtly influence behavior. When used intentionally, silence becomes a powerful tool for persuasion, control, and connection. At a basic level, silence creates space. In interpersonal interactions, people often feel pressure to fill every pause with speech, especially during moments of tension or uncertainty. This discomfort leads to impulsive responses, over-explaining, or revealing more than intended. Someone who is comfortable with silence, on the other hand, can maintain an upper hand. By simply not speaking, they compel the other person to step in and reveal their thoughts, feelings, or intentions. This is why silence is often used by skilled negotiators and interviewers. It draws out information without direct pressure. Silence also communicates confidence. When someone speaks slowly and allows moments of quiet to linger, it signals composure and self-assurance. They are not scrambling to prove themselves or rush to fill space. In contrast, someone who speaks rapidly or nervously fills every silence might be perceived as insecure or uncertain. The calm use of silence projects authority. It shows that you're in control not only of the conversation but also of your own emotions. Psychologically, silence deepens impact. A well-placed pause before or after a statement adds weight to the words. It allows the listener to absorb what was said, and creates a sense of gravity around the message. In moments of disagreement or confrontation, silence can be disarming. Rather than reacting immediately, staying quiet for a beat can shift the emotional tone, de-escalate tension, and make the other person question their assumptions. It introduces ambiguity, and in that ambiguity, people often reflect more deeply. There's also a subtle mirror effect at play. When you go silent, the other person becomes more self-aware. They may begin to reevaluate what they've just said, try to interpret your reaction, or clarify themselves without being asked. This makes silence an indirect but effective way to influence the direction of a conversation without direct confrontation. Beyond tactics, silence also builds intimacy. In relationships, romantic, familial, or even professional, comfortable silence is a sign of trust. It means two people can exist in shared presence without needing constant validation. Silence invites listening, reflection, and attention. It slows down the rhythm of interaction and makes room for more thoughtful, intentional connection. However, the power of silence lies in its timing. It must feel intentional, not awkward. When used too often or without sensitivity to context, silence can feel cold or manipulative. But when deployed with care, it becomes a statement in itself, saying more than words ever could. Ultimately, silence isn't just the gap between words. It is communication, in its most distilled form. It's the pause that invites others to step forward, the breath that gives meaning to speech, and the stillness that reveals what noise often hides. In a culture that prizes talking, silence remains one of the most underrated and potent psychological tools at our disposal. Mirroring. Mirroring is one of the most subtle yet powerful psychological tools for building rapport, trust, and connection between people. It works by unconsciously reflecting the body language, tone, expressions, or even word choices of the person you're interacting with. When done naturally and with genuine interest, mirroring creates a sense of familiarity and psychological alignment. It tells the other person, "We're alike," which can dissolve tension, build trust, and make social interactions flow more smoothly. At its core, mirroring is rooted in empathy and observation. Humans are social creatures, and we're wired to seek out those who feel safe, similar, and relatable. Mirroring taps into this instinct by subtly mimicking the behaviors of the other person in a way that signals shared understanding. When two people mirror each other, it can happen on multiple levels: physical posture, facial expressions, gestures, speech rhythms, or even emotional tone. For instance, if someone leans slightly forward while speaking, and you gradually match that posture, you're silently communicating that you're in sync with them, without either of you needing to acknowledge it. This behavior often happens unconsciously between people who are already getting along. Couples in love, close friends, and even strangers who click instantly tend to mirror each other naturally. However, it can also be used deliberately, as a social tool to deepen engagement and build connection in conversations where trust or openness might otherwise take longer to develop. The effectiveness of this trick lies in how the human brain interprets similarity. People tend to like people who seem like them. Mirroring creates the subtle illusion of sameness, which can lower defenses and enhance feelings of comfort and rapport. Neuroscience provides insight into why mirroring works so well. The brain contains special neurons called mirror neurons, which activate not only when we perform an action, but also when we observe someone else performing it. These neurons help us understand others' emotions and intentions by mirroring their experience in our own minds. When you reflect someone's behavior back to them, it activates this internal mechanism, deepening their feeling of being understood and emotionally in sync. Importantly, mirroring should always be subtle and authentic. If it's too obvious or mechanical, it can feel manipulative or awkward. The goal is not to copy someone like a mime, but to attune yourself to their energy and rhythm. If they speak calmly and slowly, you might soften your tone to match. If they use specific words or phrases often, you can echo them to create linguistic harmony. Even small adjustments, like matching someone's sitting position, hand gestures, or nodding frequency, can have a surprisingly strong psychological effect. Mirroring is especially effective in emotionally charged or high-stakes conversations, such as interviews, negotiations, or conflict resolution. It helps build a bridge of trust that makes others more willing to listen, empathize, or compromise. When people feel mirrored, they often describe feeling heard or understood, even if the content of the conversation hasn't changed. That's the hidden power of this technique. It works beneath the surface, shaping how people feel, rather than just what they hear. Ultimately, mirroring is not about manipulation, it's about resonance. When done with awareness and sincerity, it allows you to connect more deeply with others by meeting them where they are. It invites harmony into conversation, builds trust without force, and creates the kind of subtle psychological alignment that turns simple interactions into meaningful connections.